Bueno, bienvenidos a todos. Como sabéis, ICOT 2.
Hello, we are, as you know, in this ICOT 2015, the biggest World Congress of Thinking, and from the very first time in the 17 editions, is taking a block devoted to the world of the entrepreneurship. This is going to be held today and tomorrow with contents devoted to circular economy, talents, networks, and leadership. The COS Educational Leadership Group, TOAS and NOVAX, who are the main organizers of this Congress, have got the cooperation of Innovask in order to talk through the innovation about this innovation for this with this kind of things.
To this extremely interesting panel about the circular economy. And before we get started, let's watch a video that will introduce us into this fascinating subject.
Our current linear economy relies on cheap, easily available resources and fossil energy. We take, make, use, and dispose, eating into a finite supply of materials and generating waste. What's more, resources and energy are getting increasingly tough and expensive to exploit. So can it work long term? This is where the idea of a performance-based circular economy comes in. What if we didn't buy the goods themselves, but the service? What if we favoured access and performance? In this model, manufacturers or retailers would remain the owners of the products. Maintenance and repairs becoming part of the deal. Even better if running costs like electricity were included. For companies, it makes sense to retain precious materials when their future availability is uncertain and when prices are forecast to rise. Premature obsolescence would be phased out rather than designed in. Buying expensive goods up front would no longer be a necessity. It already happens with mobile phones and cars. Why not fridges, washing machines, power tools and so on? Of course, there is a wide variety of needs, of individuals, of businesses. This is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. Hundreds of different solutions can be designed with tailored contracts. Variety, freedom, flexibility and frequent upgrades. Take car-sharing schemes. We can either use vehicles owned by manufacturers, car-sharing companies, or sign up to a local person-to-person network. Communication technologies mean that our world is fast becoming a platform where we find, exchange services, or even remarket goods. It's all about access. And it works for homes and offices too. Couldn't a contract for a number of copies, or washes from a high-end appliance, be more beneficial for both providers and users? Better service at a better price. Companies win too. Materials extraction and production can represent up to 75% of the energy used to make goods. So if remanufacturing were introduced at scale, it would dramatically reduce our energy needs. At systems level, this would help the switch to renewable sources. A system that works long-term by designing out waste and keeping valuable products in the loop, and maintaining or remanufacturing them, creating jobs in the process. Shifting to a performance model is part of the solution when it comes to accelerating the transition to a circular economy. There's a world of opportunities for businesses as well as individuals, and the shift has already begun.
Well, as you have seen in the video, and you probably know, there are several approaches into the circular economy. It can be from a consumer point of view, it can be from an industrial business point of view, and of course also from a regional point of view. But there is one thing very clear, and it's that circular economy requires a great deal of innovation. Mindset innovation, first of all, but of course product, service, process, and business model innovation too. Today we have the opportunity to meet three experts that have already changed their mindsets and that are working hard from different perspectives to explain and challenge others, to put concepts into practice and to accelerate the transition towards a global circular economy model. I challenged these three experts a couple of weeks ago. I told them, we have 1 hour to make sure the audience
Yet I
leaves
know
the
we are
room.
all in this together and should act as one single world towards one single goal.
There is enough for everybody's need, but not for any.
Sorry for that. So I was telling that I challenged these three experts a couple of weeks ago, telling them that we have an hour to make sure the audience leaves the room thinking that circular economy is an opportunity they cannot miss, and wanting to explore more and implement the circular economy in their organizations. So I'm sure you can do it. Good luck, and please welcome, I'm going to introduce the three of them, and then they're going to come up to the stage and do their presentations. Afterwards, we will have a little talk or answer your questions, okay? So our first expert is Ken Webster. He's the head of innovation for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Ken has a background in education, on economics and environmental issues. He joined the foundation in the year 2010, and his latest book is The Circular Economy, A Wealth of Flows, which relates the connections between systems thinking, business opportunity, and the circular economy. We have also Guido Braam. He's the former CEO of Circle Economy, a Dutch cooperative to accelerate the transition towards a circular economy. And he also promoted the RACE coalition in the Netherlands, which he will talk to us about. He believes we need to change the rules of the game, but this cannot be done isolated. As an organization, as a region, as a country, this is a global issue. And last but not least, we have Shanin Rahimifard. Is it okay? He's professor of sustainability engineering at Loughborough University. He's the founder and director of the Center for Sustainable Manufacturing and Recycling Technologies, SMART, which was formed in the year 2004. He will be talking to us about sustainable manufacturing and remanufacturing. So please welcome them, and Ken, whenever you want.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Morning. I'm Ken Webster from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Just a couple of words about what we do. We are an NGO. We are a think tank, I suppose. We're based in the UK on an island next to the island. This is the Isle of Wight. And there are about 43 of us. We have been, I think, reasonably influential in getting the discussion about a circular economy to the fore. And I'd like to start off by saying what a circular economy is compared to what it isn't. And the obvious thing is, it's not a linear economy. It's not a linear economy. A linear economy is what we're all familiar with, which is take, make, and dispose. And it's fueled by fossil fuel energy. It mostly produces waste. The output of a linear economy is waste, with a few shiny little things, a few things that we enjoy, some very grand things that we enjoy, such as the auditorium here or the infrastructure in Bilbao, and all the modern conveniences. So what we want to be able to do is to be able to go from a system which is extremely wasteful to one which is productive for everyone. And if you think that the economy is only about materials and energy, it's obviously not true. This is the economy. Inside the white circle is the only circular part of a linear economy, which is the cycle of expenditure and consumption, or consumption and expenditure, income and expenditure. And that sort of ignores energy and materials on the outside. So a lot of the economy we describe as economy is really about exchange. It's about goods and services. It often doesn't really relate very well. It assumes there are plenty of resources, and it assumes there are plenty of places to put the waste, which is clearly not so true these days. So it worked very well for a while, but even in 1926, Frederick Soddy, who was a Nobel Prize winner, said, "The problems standing in the way of prosperity are an unsound money system and a lack of understanding of the physical reality underlying economics." So he was sort of saying an economy is embedded, is settled in flows of energy, materials, and information. So any circular economy would have to address all of those 3 points. But there's more wrong with the linear economy than just the fact that materials are high prices or are very volatile in price or availability. It's not so much just about carbon dioxide and other wastes in the atmosphere and in the seas and in the land. Here's one of the big problems. The problem is, over time, we've become more and more productive, but wages have not kept up with the productivity, so that there's increasingly less spending power available to buy the products. Now, up until about 2008, we bridged the gap with credit, but clearly there have been a number of problems since then. That's not the only problem, of course, because this leads to this. We've decided we'd like you to work from home, preferably for somebody else. You know, we've got high productivity or reasonably high productivity, stagnant wages, and we end up with jobless growth if we get growth at all. So, lack of jobs everywhere, actually, particularly for younger age groups. And of course, even the growth isn't working out so well. This is a surprising graph. I wish I could read the bottom bit more easily. It's from an Italian professor whose name I can't read at this distance. But he tracked growth rates in 13 OECD countries since the 1960s, and the trend line for growth is downwards. So what a connection of problems, what a collection of problems. We can't get the growth. The growth that's there doesn't bring jobs. The wages are stagnant anyway, so we've got lack of spending power. We've got wastes in the atmosphere, oceans, and land. We've got questions around the supply and availability of raw materials. So it's not going that well, really. We have been successful for a long time, but perhaps we need a new model, a new way of looking at it. But some people say, well, okay, it's not going so well, but we can cope. And here's an example of coping. If you can't afford a nice hall for your wedding, why not use the local petrol station since they're not selling so much petrol? This is the human spirit saying, oh, we can cope. We could do something good. We're not going to forget about the wedding. We're going to do it anyway. Which sort of works, but surely we could design an economy that meant you didn't have to do that? You know, that's the question, really. So maybe we need another story. This is a picture of an owl, obviously, but just a cheap representation of an owl. It's very approximate. Maybe that's how we've been looking at our economy, as just an approximation. Could we look at it in a more profound or more scientific way? And on the top left, Lewin, a social scientist, said, there's nothing so practical as a good theory. Einstein also said, the theory determines what we observe. You have to have a mental framework in which to understand the world. And you could change that framework, but you can't do without it. So maybe it's time to look at a slightly different framework. And Cabrera on the bottom right, though you can't see the reference, I don't think, says that if you don't have a theory, if you don't have a model, you're just fiddling around like a fool. You're not going to get anywhere. So let's see what the model might be. Fortunately, science has been busy for at least, well, for a very long time. But particularly since the advent of computers, we've begun to see that the world isn't just mechanistic, it isn't deterministic or chaotic on the other side. You know, for one we used mechanics, on the other we used statistics. Most real-world systems are in the middle. They're complex, adaptive systems. And we can model those with computing. We can look at dynamic systems, systems which are full of feedback and surprise. So that's where the real world is, in the middle. It's not a mechanistic world. You know, in the old economic model, we thought the world was like a machine and the market was the mechanism. It sort of works, but it's very crude. Now we can apply more advanced techniques to looking at interrelationships and their consequences. So the writers which are underlying the circular economy are people like these, and they all have this systems view to the front. That's the big difference. They take insights from complex adaptive systems, particularly living systems, as a guide to how they think about the economy, about design, about products, about how we might get enabling conditions, which is going to be the main point of my very short talk. Now here's a diagram. It's called the butterfly diagram in common discussion. Down the middle is the linear economy. That's sort of a throughput economy down the middle, where we just take, make, and dispose. But after McDonough and Braungart's work, we can look at the flows of materials as either in the biocycle, which means that they can be successfully and safely composted or brought back to life through living systems. And on the right-hand side, you have a technical cycle where you will see something quite familiar, which is recycling, but it's way out on the loop there. It's way on the outer loop, which makes a suggestion that there are other loops we could be attending to. And this was perhaps the thing that the Foundation helped with most. We asked McKinsey to say what was the business and economic opportunity from working rather differently by working with these loops. And so this is a feedback-rich economy, and they said there was a great deal of economic and business advantage, particularly from the inner loops, from the tighter loops. So if you're thinking of making money in an economy which, as the video suggested, is full of feedback, which might be about access, then it's much more around these things like maintenance, remanufacturing, refurbishing, products of service, or in the tighter loops in the biocycle. Recycling, it's fine, but that doesn't change the business model. That's just a linear economy with a bit of a return loop. Now, the return loop helps businesses decide between virgin materials or recycled materials. So it's okay, but look at all the quality. Say it was something like this. It's just smashed up. All the quality in here, all the possibilities. In recycling, it's usually returned to its material state and minced up, mashed up. So that's not a great business choice. And with low oil prices at the moment, you know that many recycling businesses are going out of business. So there are better business models, and we got 3 reports done on where the business advantage is. They're called Towards the Circular Economy, volumes 1, 2, and 3. And only last week there was a report that was launched in Brussels with the EU Commission around, it's called Growth Within, and looking at cities in particular and the flows of food, how people get around, mobility, and the built environment, which had some very satisfactory big figures looking at the advantages of going more circular or having more feedback in the system. But before we get to the enabling conditions, there's another little thing I need to point out. This is the whole system. It's about optimizing the whole system. Conventional economics is much more about how efficient we are, doing more with less, doing things right, doing more, faster, lower labor, energy and material costs. But that's only getting those products out there cheaply with low impact. Effectiveness is about the whole system and how that works. It's about optimizing the whole system. It's about transforming and returning and retaining quality. A bit like this image of a lung system here. There's no point in just delivering oxygen to the bloodstream if you can't take carbon dioxide out of it. And although you can't read it very well at the bottom, this is a note from Gunter Pauli that we have to not just deal with lowering cost, but how communities add value locally with what's available. So we're talking about the system, the big players as well as the small ones. And here's an example of what he might mean. You can grow mushrooms, as many people know, on coffee waste, because coffee is almost all waste. And mushrooms can be part of another set of cash flows, illustrated loosely here with, through feeding animals and composting and so on. His book, The Blue Economy, is very, very interesting about pretty grassroots developments. So we need an effective system. And just before we get on to the enabling ones, here's a summary. And it is important for me and for the Foundation to say that this is about philosophy and action and enabling. It's not just, oh, here's 2 or 3 business models that can get a bit more revenue. There's more in the discussion flow than that. So we've seen that it's about a worldview, how we think and learn, about how we see things. Science sees a world of dynamic, nonlinear systems, so eventually economics will do that even more. Not there yet. Everything is food, or waste is food. There are 2 cycles, technical and biological. We need a shift to renewables, that's happening anyway, and a shift from selling goods to services and performance, because with the best will in the world, once you've sold a valuable object, it's hard to get it back if it's of low to medium value. It's not so difficult if it's a high value item. We've got to rebuild capital. Look at the forests, the seas, the fisheries. They're somewhat degraded. The land, they could be much more productive. And fine, that's great. That's just what I need. And we need to celebrate diversity in the system. Now, on the enabling conditions, very quickly. First of all, education. We need to move from, on the one side here, a more analytic approach to one which is more synthetic, systemic, which you can see online in the website some of these differences, but if it's and there's no time to explain through that, except that to say it's a more systems thinking approach. In making things work better, this is a Dutch NGO. They suggest, and we go along with this a great deal, that why would you tax things which we want more of? Why should we tax people? Why don't we tax non-renewable resources? Because if you want to employ more people, why we put a burden on them? And one of the biggest wastes in the system is the waste of human intelligence and energy and capability. So that's one of the biggest wastes to remove. And we've got to make prices tell the truth. This is an old thing, because if prices don't tell the truth, markets can't be used effectively. And so we're back to Frederick Soddy. He said there are 3 levels to this prosperity. One is a reformed money and credit system. I haven't got time to go into that, but you could look it up under modern monetary theory. There's the circulation of products in different ways with new business models, which are challenging, but we've got the research to suggest that these, in many cases, can be profitable. That's what the draw is. And looking at energy materials and other flows in a more rational way. So, just looking at the money flows, just one example, it can include things like crowdfunding, peer-to-peer lending, complementary currencies to help energize those exchanges which are underplayed at the moment. Now, these are rules of the game, but I wanted just to end with a summary of what are the main sort of principles or drivers of making sure an economy moves from linear to circular. The first thing is that waste should become food, or everything is food. You don't ask what the end of life is. You say, what is the end of this particular use? What's next? You ask, what's next? Diversity is strength. A diverse system is both creative and resilient. We're in a shift towards renewables. Prices should reflect the full costs, otherwise markets don't work very well. And money should be essentially around facilitating the exchange of goods and services, and less as a store of value. But that's a more technical argument I could always go into if asked. So there we are. I think I'm under my 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you.
Good morning, dear fellow human beings. Thank you very much for having this opportunity to speak to you for the next 15 minutes. Talk to you about circular economy in general, but also the lessons I've learned in setting up the circular economy, a not-for-profit cooperative. Particularly, I want to focus more with you on, like Carolina said, on the change we have to make in terms of collaboration, the mindset change we need there, and also how hard it can be to collaborate in a good manner, on a personal level, on an organizational level, and sometimes even on a national level. Because we face tremendous challenges on Earth, and you might expect that my talk, since the title is Netherlands as a Circular Hotspot, my talk is about the Netherlands. But it's not. It's not about the Netherlands. It's about all of us. How do you say that? All of us in Spanish, I don't know. But it's about all of us because we face tremendous challenges, and I'm not so much as a doom preacher, but recently Pope Francesco wrote a new encyclical called Laudato Si. If you read that, he perfectly describes in his own words our common challenge and how we destroy our own home, take down society, and take Mother Earth with us down in the fall. And I think we forgot something as human beings. Oh, let's go a little bit too fast. We forgot something as human beings because all is one. Todo es uno. Dena batada. I hope I pronounced that correctly in Basque. Might offend you now, so sorry for that. We forgot that we as human beings are part of a bigger system, a visible system and an invisible system. And here at the International Conference on Thinking, we see what mankind can do, how much progress we made as mankind in terms of sports, arts, business, education. What our human development is as strong as the weakest link. We forgot about ecology. We forgot to balance with nature. We thought we could control nature, which is ridiculous. We have to learn from it. We have to adapt by nature, because otherwise we face these tremendous challenges. And don't you worry, the Earth will survive, but we as human beings might have a little bit of an issue. One thing, though, this is not photoshopped. This is Louis Berlin, a Chinese artist, very interesting person. I think our development started 250 years ago in the industrial age. In that time, we had tremendous speed in terms of innovation and way forward. And sometimes I think our collective consciousness is lacking behind to that technological development. We had so much innovation since then, but it's a little bit like we are kids that invented fire, but don't know how to control it. And in the business arena, we don't spend much time on history. Like Hegel said, all we've learned from history is that we haven't learned anything from it. So I was intrigued by this picture in the Tate Modern, not so much by the art itself in Tate Modern, but when I visited the museum, I saw this huge wall where all the two thoughts of school were described in arts, and how they respond towards each other, and how also sometimes one school of thought was disruptive for the status quo. It would be great if we could do that also within sort of the business arena and see how we developed and stand on the shoulder of giants and develop further. It's the same Hegel who said that he believed that the only thing to change is that there is at the moment a thesis, there is an entities, and ultimately they become a synthesis. And if you compare that to the business arena, you see that we now have this industrial age we're living in. We're still living in this industrial linear economy. And the last 40 years there has been this entities about sustainability, a moral appeal for imperfect people like you and me to do less bad. And the good news about circular economy is that it combines, it creates that synthesis between still continue as human beings to develop, innovate, create jobs, create perhaps some good old-fashioned capitalistic growth, but also solving issues like biodiversity. This is one of the biggest threats for mankind at the moment. But also the issues with emissions and having the difficulty to have access to resources. It's an holistic view on circular economy, just like Ken Webster just described. So 3 years ago, I was very naive and thought, well, let's do 100 circular economy projects, and then the circular economy will come by itself. And then people asked me the question, how do you measure circularity? And also, some people said to me, you can do 1,000 projects without changing the world. So at Circular Economy, we invested heavily in creating this framework, not only to measure, but also to find the spots in the system, a sector or a supply chain, where there are the tipping points, in the system to sort of create a chain reaction, a positive chain reaction. We now implement this framework also for an investment tool, which is great. Because if a big pension fund adopts this, and we already did one pilot, it can have a massive impact also in terms of how investors are not looking back at risk, but looking at the risk of the future and incentivize the circular economy. And we found out that we do have to do some material flow mapping. We found out that not a single organization can become circular. It's always a total supply chain that needs to change, or a total region. So with the help of material flow mapping, we mapped out the opportunities. But later on, we also pinpointed the stakeholders and perhaps create a coalition of the willing. So for instance, this was in the dairy industry, and we invited the banks, the governments, the farmers, etc., and we found a perfectly good, reasonable business case to get the minerals back out of the manure, to get energy out of that. But you need people to collaborate there, and instead of just inviting them and talk it over, we used a lot of data and we were very precise on who needs to do what. And only in the last year I found out you also have to take into account the losers, because circular economy will also have losers and not only winners. So you also need to see how you can help them out, because nobody is against the circular economy. But people do try to protect their own vested interest, and people do try to protect the knowledge they've built up. So please take into account these losers and find ways in the transition parts to give them perspective as well. This all needs, like I said, a new kind of thinking, less competitive thinking, more inclusive thinking, more open, transparent, less thinking in terms of scarcity, but more thinking in terms of abundance. And then you might ask, why are you starting Netherlands as a circular hotspot? That sounds rather competitive. Well, that's because we want to be world champions for once. And you in Spain will probably understand how badly we need this. But you probably also understand that sometimes competition can bring out the worst in us. And this is Xabi Alonso, a Basque player, and I have to say here, from the whole Dutch nation, we're sorry. We will not do this again. We want to have a fair competition. So the idea of Netherlands Circular Hotspot is not about the Netherlands. It's about finding solutions, finding a test bed, finding an experimental room where we can try out this circular economy. The idea stems from Linda Gretton. She wrote about hotspots and why is it in certain conditions possible to be more innovative. And from Mariano Mazzucato, who describes that it is in fact the government that is the biggest innovator in the world, especially in early stages. And why the Netherlands, you might ask? Well, there's a simple reason. We are rather small. 68% of our land is used for agriculture and 50% for infrastructure and city, whereas in the rest of the world it is 0.5%. So we are, as PBL says, a council in the Netherlands, a low-density city. Not a high-density country, but a low-density city. We are Singapore with a little bit of extra land. We face the same challenges as cities does. And at the moment, cities consume and rural areas produce. So a farmer once said to me, every time a farmer moves from rural land to the city, we have one producer less and we have one consumer more. And if we then know that 70% of the world population lives in cities in 2030, you might sort of realize that we have a big issue to solve there. We need to make cities more self-sufficient. We need to create this value within cities itself. And if we can do that in the Netherlands, we can test that out. And it can be exported all over the world. There are some other reasons as well why Netherlands is suited for this, because we always had this sort of fight against water, and the scarcity of land always had to make us innovative. And at the moment, 22% of our GDP is coming from companies that earn money with technology in terms of water and agri-food. I believe that circular economy can be that next export product of the Netherlands, which is great because it's a solution for the world. There are several reasons why Netherlands is suited to sort of be the first hotspot, and please let there be more hotspots in the world. And one of them is also culture. We have a word for that in the Netherlands. It's called polderen. And there is no translation for that. I asked, but there is no translation for that. It is sort of creating a consensus nationwide, but it goes very far. Not having an agreement, but realizing that you have to stick together and do it together. That stems back in the Netherlands from the fact that we had to fight water together, and we cannot have fights within our own country. That's the ideal state for getting the circular hotspot within the Netherlands. Also, we have challenges, of course, because the last 15 years, the Netherlands has become very risk-averse, afraid of a journalist asking questions and bashing you when you make one single mistake. And circular economy is not proven technology. We need to test it out. We need to experiment. We need to trial and error see if we can, by bringing it into action, like Ken Webster said, translate that back to thinking again and make sure that we translate that into a new framework. So what do we do with Netherlands Circular Hotspot? That stems back from a talk we had with the Prime Minister. He was enthusiastic about circular economy. I'm not sure whether it was about the whole framework or more about that we said it could gain 20 billion euros within the Netherlands alone. But he did some phone calls and we had some round tables with the Socio-Economic Council, and there were a lot of people there very enthusiastic about this idea. And then the chairman of the Socio-Economic Council said to the Royal Highness Prince Carlos, can you write down a vision, launch that during the EU presidency of the Netherlands in 2016, and can you do that by interviewing the non-converted? Not writing down a vision with all the converters that believe in the circular economy, but go to people that never heard about it. Go to the unions, go to the political arenas that are not that enthusiastic about circular economy yet, and create a vision what Netherlands as a circular hotspot should look like. We will do some extra stuff as well. We will organize an official incoming trade mission to show everybody who's interested in what's going on in the Netherlands. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. And we will organize an exposition for people close to the airport that want to visit and to see this circular economy in practice. I sure hope this is the right translation as well, but it reminds me of race, because of that gathering, that round table with the 35 people that talk about Netherlands Circular Hotspot. The Ministry of Environment and Economic Affairs also stood up and said, let's do this together. Let's see if the 5 NGOs that are currently working on the circular economy can collaborate with each other, because now the activities are very scattered around the country and we need to collaborate with each other. And this Chinese proverb says, okay, if you travel alone you can go faster, and together you go further. And that's absolutely true, but also very hard. Because all of a sudden there was budget to do things we really wanted to do as NGOs. And it started to become a Netherlands Circular, Netherlands Circular, and we had to collaborate with a lot of organizations. But I also act sometimes with fear. I also act sometimes like becomes a little bit sort of greedy, saying, okay, there's budget that could sort of make sure that my team has enough to do what they need to do. But in this situation where we had to collaborate with each other, there was budget, but we had to be very honest with each other on how to divide the budget and to do what you're best in, and not so much killing it all in. So we started up 7 teams, and instead of me saying we can do it all, we divided the work in a very honest way. And there's no leadership there, there's no one person in charge. So we had to find out our own ways and how to divide that work. And as circular economy, we invested, or we chose to have this expert role in terms of design and changing these supply chains altogether, and disseminate that knowledge in the tooling we've built. It's also a good thing, because all of a sudden there was budget, and now we are more capable of translating that tools and give that back, disseminate that to mainstream. And like I said, sometimes I had this feeling like, okay, now is the opportunity to get in a lot of funding to do the things we as circular economy want to do, instead of seeing that money goes to other people who can do a better job. And often when I think about when I'm in a mental state of scarcity, I think back of a lady I met 5 years ago, a Suriname lady, who said to me, Guido, if you have hand in your sand and you squeeze because you're fearful, then you probably lose it all. And if you're calm, and you open your hand, you put in some sand, and even add another hand to it, something beautiful can grow out of that. And that's the mental stage I want to be in, also collaborating with others, being open and being capable to do things together. Like I earlier said, the last 3 years I've been the CEO of Circular Economy. I will take a next step toward trying to make Netherlands a circular hotspot. And I will, instead of supporting entrepreneurs, continue to be an entrepreneur again, starting up circular and social business. Because I believe we need more entrepreneurs filling the gaps and failures in society. And to conclude, I sure hope that I sort of reach out to your inner voice, because your inner voice is talking to you all day, saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing? Where do you spend your time to? That's the only scarcity we have, time here on Earth. So where do you spend it on? And I sure hope that voice is now saying to you, why not spend it on solving the world's biggest issues? There is a framework in place, the concept called circular economy. How can I translate that to my daily life, to my business perhaps? Because I can sure tell you, it's much more meaningful, it's much more fun. And if you only have, like say, 60 vital years here on Mother Earth, you can better spend it on leaving a legacy and making sure that next generations to come will prosper from your talents, from your leadership. Because to close off, the circular economy is very logical. It's also inevitable, but it needs a lot of leadership. It needs a lot of wisdom. It needs a lot of action. It needs a lot of perseverance also. So I hope it made you think. That's what you can expect on an international conference on thinking. And I hope after today that you will take the first steps or continue taking steps towards the circular economy. Thank you very much.
Right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Shanin Rahimifard. I'm part of a Center for a Smart at Loughborough University. I had the pleasure to take part in the cocktail dinner last night and met a lot of really interesting people. It's my first time attending ICOT, and there was lots of interesting discussion was going on. One of the common questions was, where is Loughborough or Longborough? So I thought I'd add this just to show that Loughborough is in the kind of middle of the UK between Leicester and Nottingham. This is our sort of campus, very much like an American-style type of a university, very big on sport and engineering. And for those of you who want to know exactly, Caroline was asking me, where is Loughborough? Where is exactly Loughborough? Is it in London? I said, it's a bit outside London, about 120 miles north of London in Midlands. So I have a pleasure of working with 25 young researchers who are, well, in fact, 24 young researchers and me, working on these 4 areas. Because when it comes to issues like circular economy or a wider consideration of sustainability, we've realized that you can't just focus on one issue, whether it's to do with technology or looking at design of our products, business models, or the way we consume it. Typically, this is a chain, and there are various influences from each of these in what we do and what we decide. So the people that are working in this area sometimes are looking at solutions for today and tomorrow. So they're kind of developing design methodologies for circular economy, looking at technologies to improve remanufacturing, which is what I'll talk a bit later, and also all sorts. But from time to time, we come together as a group and do some sort of a long-term thinking. Our most recent sort of effort has been about scenario planning. Exactly what are we doing? And this scenario planning has been, at the moment, the excitement is there about circular economy, about sustainability, but are we doing the right things? Are we actually adopting the right targets? And this sort of long-term planning has been about informing our short-term decisions. So I'm going to tell you a bit about all of this, hopefully during the next 10 minutes. So why do we need that? We all know by now, a few years ago, we had to actually explain to the people about environmental impact, about what we're doing to our environment and so on. But now this is well understood, mostly agreed. Just only recently, last week, President Obama had an interview with David Attenborough, who's a naturalist, UK naturalist, and it was a very informing sort of an interview where he actually went to the depth of the issues and sort of very clearly identified some of the challenges. As a result of that, we've started a number of international activities, and these international activities are paying off, slowing down certain environmental impact that we make. But if you have a look at various performance measures, the net effect of our environmental impact is still going up. So we are advancing, for example, on our green energy, but in 2030, we need 45% more energy than today's levels. So that kind of creates a sort of a scenario that we need to sort of plan for more long-term thinking, more sort of a strategic thinking. This is explained very nicely by Hans Rosling, a famous mathematician, thought leader in this area, where he used the example of a washing machine to make a point about our reliance on resources. First of all, he highlighted how much this new technology has liberated the life of almost half of the world population in terms of not having to spend hours per day trying to do this. These days, fully automatic. We could do lots of washing very quickly, very efficiently. But at what cost? What is the sort of cost of this? The cost of this is that you actually look at the use of the resources by various people, by, human population in terms of how much resources they use in daily life. And this is how he sort of explained the split in that there are, as you know, in 2013, we exceeded 7 billion sort of people on the world. 2 billion that are really using little resources in daily life. There are about further 3 billion people who are using just enough resources in terms of environmental talk as an eco-environmental load of one, living within harmony, living within the ecosystem. But most of the problems that we are experiencing in terms of climate change and others is due to the 2 billion or 20% of the world population that are using multiple of if you like, amount of resources that we can sustain in the long term. So based on this understanding, he's kind of forward thinking in 2050, and he said, so what are we going to find ourselves in 2050? Where we have a problem with the resources so far, our best case scenario is that these 2 billion people are going to be among those low resource using sort of population. But in reality, we see this in our daily life, the problems that, for example, exist at the moment in terms of immigration between north of Africa and south of Europe, various people, growth in India and China, which together have 25% of the world population. It's more likely that we're going to end up with this type of scenario, where not only the new population is among sort of very resource-intensive sort of lifestyle, most of the other 7 billion is moved on into using more resources, which is good, which is something that we should celebrate. We want everybody to enjoy the type of life cycle that lifestyle that we enjoy in the West. And, things like healthcare. If you're a parent, you kind of realize that this is a story close to everybody's heart. You don't want your child to have the benefit to access the best type of healthcare, and then others not to be able to do it. So this is not scaremongering. This is not a gloomy type of a picture. This is something we need to celebrate. But I'm an engineer, and I like to deal with reality, and I like to actually be sort of practical about the things. So this is a challenge. What we're seeing here is a challenge that we need to sort of raise to. Now, how do we do this? What we do is we already realized that the no change is going to sort of worsen the situation. With our current change, we're slowing down the pattern of impact, but we're not making a huge impact in that. What we really need, because when you look at some of the recorded effects of climate change, we are rapidly reaching points of irreversible changes. So we not only need to actually slow down, we need to reverse, we need to make a positive impact on the environment to be able to repair some of the problems that we've caused. How do you do that? You certainly don't do that by coming up with the short-term targets. One of the things that internationally we can be most proud of is this Kyoto protocol, where we set 20% of the CO2 cut by 2020 in comparison to 1990. But who knows whether that really leads to anything in the long term? So how would we answer that? The way that we answer is we feel that we need to look beyond the next 5 or 10 years to see the real problems that we're facing and learn from that thought process and inform our shorter-term decisions. One of the projects that whole of the group was involved, it was about this smart envisioning the manufacturing at 2050. So we actually came together, a period of 2 or 3 years, all sorts of studies, reviews, talking to different people, interviews with thought leaders, and said, in 2050, what sort of world manufacturing is going to find itself to? We look at the issues like resource depletion, global population, and climate change. Details of this work is a very lengthy work. It's been published in a paper which was delivered in Life Cycle Engineering Conference. So if you've got any interest, either come to see me or look this paper up. But in reality, it was based on a process of sort of scenario planning. So in our scenario planning, what we did was, not going to go into the details, we had a look at the world and we identified there is 4 possible scenarios for this. So the scenario we are kind of leading into is this unsustainable planet. Where we want to be is the sustainable planet. The 2 other alternatives are this, what we call technologically sustained planet or socio-economically sustained planet. So these are the 2 possibilities where technology has made real advances and allowed us to be much more efficient than we are, helping with our eco-efficiency, or socio-economical sustainability, where due to the reduction in our consumption, due to educations, because of the economical reasons like economical crisis, we are kind of becoming more sustainable in our consumption. So a lot of people agree that moving from sort of unsustainable to sustainable planet is just not like an electric switch that we could go from one to the other. So we have to kind of use either via technology or socio-economical sort of approaches. But the problem is that when you look at the technology, you have this sort of vicious circle in that our technology improves, but then we use most of it and more of it. So look at, for example, the amount of energy that mobile phones uses in comparison to the old mobile phones. But then we have so many more mobile phones being used, and it seems that the technology pushes towards the sustainable planet, but because we use more of a technology, it pushes us back. The same thing can be said about socio-economical approach. Look at the last few years, because of this economical crisis, there's been a huge hit in manufacturing about amount of goods that have been sold and stuff. What do we see as a way out of it is to encourage people to go and buy more goods, more product. And that, again, pushes us to sort of unsustainable planet. So in reality, the only hope we've got is when we are ahead of the game, to have this strategic approach to push ourselves towards sustainable planet as opposed to use the technology in the wrong way and go back into our unsustainable planet. And in a similar way, where we're in a position that people will now talking about investment, hopefully that investment is not about encouraging consumerism, asking people to go and replace their cars. Hopefully we'll ask them to replace their cars with the right technology that doesn't cause as much sort of impact and so on. So, circular economy in the context of product recovery, there is already been talk about various options of remanufacturing, reuse, recycling, and incineration. I was asked very briefly to sort of consider some of the issues with remanufacturing. The idea of remanufacturing is make as good or even better product than originally a product was designed for. So this is not just a small repair and reconditioning, which is typically done as part of the repair and reconditioning. Remanufacturing is taking a really old product and putting something as good as it was new or even better. Lots of processes in there. You need to take the product back, so there's reverse logistics. You have to sort of assess it, you have to inspect it, you have to prepare it, and you have to sort of ensure, you have to test it to sort of provide the warranties and guarantees that people want. So it is a resource-consuming process itself. Remanufacturing, possibly in a lot of specific applications, more sort of beneficial than manufacturing. But there are cases where if we pick up the wrong product, we are actually using more resources to bring the product which is inefficient back into life. And that's a huge issue which sort of puts remanufacturing in a new light, that we should be very selective about the areas that we choose to actually do that. Where it's been successful, the results have been great in terms of return on labor sort of intensity, about the money, about the value recovery in comparison to both manufacturing and recycling. A success story is, for example, in the case of Caterpillar, that they're remanufacturing their engines and so on. So, there's a lot of profit and benefits being suggested in terms of saving on materials, saving on the processes, saving on money, saving on the water that is being used, and saving on logistics that we've got to distribute our product. But there are a number of challenges as well. There is uncertainty about the quantity and quality of the product that comes to and when they come. So it's very difficult to plan a larger scale operation, because it's not like a raging material that you have access to and you can forward plan your activities. Lots of challenges, not time to go through. If you have sort of interest in this, please do come and see me. Happy to talk to you. One of the main challenges in terms of economical viability is that it's very labor intensive. So what we've done in Loughborough, we've actually come up with, as an example of the technology we're working on to help with remanufacturing, we come up with a robotic cell that actually getting robot to do most of the dismantling and, if possible, remanufacturing of the product. We are testing it on various parts and components that are coming from the automotive cars, particularly electrical cars, some really interesting, exciting sort of results. If you want to see this process, I have a video of it. Come and see me during the break. I'm happy to share that with you. Now, to conclude, this is where I think the long-term thinking is really essential. Does the achievement of circular economy addresses our long-term sort of challenges? To me, circular economy is a must. It's something that we should have done many years ago. Now, hopefully, we're going towards it. But on its own, I don't think it will answer our great challenges, future challenges. We've got to think about what we produce to ensure that they're actually addressing need, and we have to look at the behavior. Is it all doom and gloom? No. If you have a look at the majority of sustainability messages, they're very positive. One person can make a difference, and every person should try. Brilliant JFK, many years ago. Question of, can we afford it? It might not have the monetary understanding that we have at the moment in a few years. Do we have the right material, right energy to do it? Sustainable development, which is something that people now think, well, we achieved it, there are enough people working on it, is a journey that we have just started. And in this journey, we must focus on the issues that unite us rather than those that divide us. There is no wrong or right initiatives in sustainable development. If it's helping us, it's something that we should do. And then finally, why do we do all of this? There is no planet B, and we've got to realize, very, very meaningful proverb, in that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. I think we have a couple of microphones in the room. I don't see them. Where are the microphones? Oh, here. We're open for questions, so please. Any questions so far? No? Shall I start with one then? Yeah? You have one? Go ahead.
Hello, good morning. You have mentioned both philosophy and action. I'm more into action, but I would like to know your opinion because I understood that this is very holistic. The first question is, how much do you think it is important to be a first mover in this thing about circular economy, both from industrial point of view, business, and from a regional or national point of view? And the second question is, or would be, how important do you think it is the role for government in this field, in terms of putting, I don't know, maybe financial instruments and stuff like that? Thank you.
Who wants to start?
I could start. Is this on? Yeah. I could start perhaps. I'll just pick up one part of it, and colleagues here will pick up their bits that they would like to answer. First movers advantage. It's often said that a pioneer is somebody who ends up face down in the mud with 3 spears in their back. You know, obviously you have to have the timing right, because we learn, if we learn anything from history, and perhaps we don't learn very much, is that the first people to try things out fail. But failure, as we learned yesterday from one of the speakers, is the first attempt in learning. You know? So there's going to be lots of innovation, lots of tryouts, lots of businesses that don't work. But the rewards for those who get the business model right will be and are huge. So it's not just about first mover, it's about those who can learn fastest, adapt quickly, and get in there, I think. Sorry, Guido?
I really recognize what you're saying, because a lot of our members also expect we try to sort of implement circular economy with them, and especially the bigger corporates. They expect a sort of proven technology and that they can gain profit from it directly. But in a lot of cases, like I said, it's the long-term perspective you have to take into account. And then coming back to your second question about the role of the government, often it's said that they have to provide money or something like that. It's good to realize that, like I said, Mariano Mazzucato wrote this book, The Entrepreneurial State. And there she showed that Silicon Valley was not built by big investors, neither the startups, but that it was mainly the government in a very early stage that had the guts to have failure. So 60% of the patents in an iPhone was paid by American taxpayers. We will never have a technology like this if it's only accomplished by the market itself. So especially in a new paradigm, you need a little bit of that leadership and first mover risk, I would say.
I look also to pick up another point about your question, which is about the role of the governments. So we had this very interesting discussion last night about globalization, which is, in the context of sustainability, has been a dirty word. It's been a situation where larger sort of multinationals have used their low-cost labor in certain countries to exploit a sort of type of a labor in there on the things and make the products cheaper, make more of them, get us used into consumerism and so on. It's been really some sort of a dark image associated to it. But the word globalization now more recently is used in a very positive manner, in that most of the problems that we have is global problems. When we talk about climate change, global warming, depletion of resources, we are living in a society that we're so much dependent on one another, we can't actually make significant impacts on just regional base activities that are focusing on very small things. So, for example, on this circular economy, where you're looking at most of the activities of bigger manufacturers, most of their products and sub-assemblies are made for them by the suppliers and so on. So it was, as it was suggested, that when you talk about the supply chain of manufacturing and sort of circular economy, you have to have all of your supply chain, which sometimes could be 10 or 12 tiers, to buy to the actual concept and do it. So this not only highlights the role of the governments, but also the international society, that we have to have agreements that are internationally respected. Otherwise, everything seems to be sort of a solution to a particular problem, like, for example, the Producer Responsibility Directive in EU, that in automotive and in electrical electronic, anything that you make has to be taken back. Now, the rest of the world have taken note of this. The rest of the world that we have manufacturers who are actually retail their product in Europe have to adhere to it. But now we are having looked at it, they're saying, well, this is not going to work until internationally a lot of people understand the concept that manufacturers have got responsibility towards the end of life, or as Ken was saying, about the next life of the product. Because if you just put that to the user, to the government, the investment requirement might not be there. So in summary, I think when we talk about the governments, there is a role in terms of the national role in investing in this technology, but also international role in trying to, in this global society, global community, to come up with an infrastructure that facilitates and provides support for the people to achieve these type of ideas.
Thank you. And following that question, what's the role of the European Commission and what do you expect them to do? They have announced that they're going to come up with a plan.
At the moment, they had a circular economy package which was withdrawn for review. It is in public consultation at the moment, but I think it's probably going to come back in a much larger and grander form quite soon, because it addresses two of the main needs in the Union, which is jobs and growth. And I think we're going to see a much more advanced publication on this later in the year. Our recent report, Growth Within, did indicate some pretty big figures for the benefits of some degree of change.
And then the distance between the European Committee and action on the ground is quite large. So like said before also by Ken, it's much more, circular economy needs sort of a local approach, more a bottom-up approach. But it is helpful, this legislation gives a little bit of more freedom or incentivize the circular economy a little bit more. But the difficulty with circular economy is that you have to make trade-offs. And that's very difficult for any government. Because you can choose for percentage rates, recycling rates of 80%, but you have to take into account whether that is including the toxicity in materials, or whether that is done with fossil fuel or not, or renewable energy. So these kind of questions are so holistic and broad that it's very difficult for a small government even to have that overview. And on a European level, it's even more difficult to make choices there and to have that framework in place. So, but I'm very positive about what happened last year, because when it was withdrawn, it was sort of a minor mistake. But now they dived into that, and people like Frans Timmermans and other people within the Commission start to understand the real potential impact of the circular economy, and now much better. So it was not a waste. In terms of waste, it was not a wasted year.
I feel European Commission has been leading in this area, significant investment in terms of legislation and policy. It's been really interesting that they push the barriers. But as we all know, they have much more urgent issues to do with Euro and success of the Union happening in Greece and in other countries. Typically, when these things have happened, authorities take their sort of eye off the ball. We've seen in various countries when there is a economical crisis, first thing that gets affected, the issues that doesn't have immediate return. I just hope that in European Commission, because of these problems that we all know and aware of, we don't get less of commitment and sort of investment towards climate change, as we've seen in some of the other countries because of their economical problem. And they continue to lead in this area.
Thank you. There's a question over there, please. Please raise your hand. Levanta la mano para.
Buenos días.
Good morning to you all. Thank you for the 3 interventions that I have found very interesting. The headsets, they need to wear the headsets now, yeah?
Put it on.
Sí.
Yeah? Okay, can you hear me now? Just a sec. That's okay now. Okay, good morning. I have found very interesting the three interventions. For me, it's the very first time that I've heard about circular economy. I'm a teacher of a school here in Spain. And my question is that I see that perhaps there's a different framework. What I wanted to say is to reduce the scale. We have to reduce the scale. You are talking about government, European Commission. Is there any initiative or are there any experiences to implement something of the circular economy to the schools, to educational institutions where services are provided, if people are producers? Well, I don't know, any experience you might have known in the Netherlands. Isn't it possible? Perhaps you are moving in another framework. I don't know.
The Ellen MacArthur Foundation started off very much with an educational remit, and we did quite a lot of work with design and technology associations in engineering and so on. And there are quite a number of publications, but not in Spanish, unfortunately. But there are quite a number of connections through on our website, ellenmacarthurfoundation.org. You're very welcome to take any. There's lots of videos, lots of other things. And some of them have got subtitles already, but if you are very keen, you can take our films and subtitle them if you like, or play with it. So we've got quite a lot of for secondary schools, and not primary schools, but secondary high schools, and into universities. We have an extensive university network as well. Again, you can find more details through the website. So we've been talking here perhaps on the EU level or the big picture, but there is quite a lot that we have that might be of interest to you, and let us know if it is or what you would like.
So I can only underwrite that Ellen MacArthur Foundation has a lot of things there. It started, I think, focusing on education, and it is the right momentum to discuss this at primary schools as well. A colleague of mine went to a primary school, and we are often talking about unlearning things. We can also prevent that people have to unlearn in a later stage, because it becomes automatically that they are used to systems thinking. And you saw at the primary school for kids at the age of 8 to 10 that this is quite logical thinking. They even thought linear thinking was quite ridiculous. So that's funny. In the Netherlands, we have an initiative that's called Circular Learning. Translate that in Circular Leren. I can provide you with some information there as well. And we have to give as much support as possible to bring it into practice in an early stage.
And in terms of university, there is a long-standing program, I'm sure you must have heard or are aware of, called STEM, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Maths, which various universities are kind of helping primary schools, secondary schools, high schools to sort of incorporate appropriate syllabuses on various things. And on science and engineering, we've been very active to working with our colleges to incorporate this idea of sustainability in their education. There is also a very sort of aggressive program on this by Royal Academy of Engineering in UK, who's trying to incorporate sustainability in sort of first and secondary educations. And they're actually providing syllabuses and material. Again, I'm not sure whether they're in Spanish, but if you like, I'll be happy to actually put you in touch with us.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Sí. Bueno, muy buenos días.
Good morning to you all. I have come with my colleague from Colombia, and I would like to pose you the following question. You know that Colombia is a producing country, an agricultural country, and I would like you to know something regarding the mining sector. So this is the question. Which piece of advice can you give us for our country and for the world at the time of implementing circular economy in the mining sector?
Short response to that. You might think it's impossible in the mining area, but some very large firms have been exploring not selling their product from the mines, but leasing it so that their molecules come back. So that's the hot topic at the moment.
And I think Chile was, with copper, one of those countries who is thinking about how to have some stewardship about their own resources. So that's very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Not well developed yet, but big topic.
Could be a front runner there.
I think we have to stop the session, but I talked to the speakers and asked them to stay around at least for the coffee break. So if you have any questions, just come and, take your chance. Thank you.
Thank you.